Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Nancy and thank you so much for joining me today. So we are continuing with the house. The painting is finally done. Everything has been cleaned up. The furniture is back in place, some furniture. And now we are just doing the little things, the little touches here and there, trying to make everything feel like home again. And one thing about me, guys, is I am not a decorator at all. I do not decorate. I'm not good at decorating the house, nor do I have the money to hire a decorating person, a decorator. However, I love a beautiful decorated house. I love seeing everything put together and looking beautiful. But when it comes to my place, my space, I have realized that I function a little bit differently. For me, less is better. I like open spaces. I like being able to look around and feel like I can breathe, because like too many things around me can become overwhelming. And knowing myself, if I keep adding things just because they look beautiful, eventually I'm probably going to start taking them right back out, throwing things out. That's just me. So I have been moving things around, putting something here, taking something away from there, stepping back, looking again and saying, no, that doesn't belong there. And sometimes the hardest part for me is letting go of how I had already pictured it in my mind, because I can have something arranged perfectly in my mind before I even see it in the actual place, in the actual space. I already know where the chair is going. I already know where the picture is going. I already have this picture in my head of how everything is supposed to come together. And then I put it there and it doesn't work. But because I have already fallen in love with the picture in my mind, in my head, I can spend so much time trying to make it work again, or trying to force it to work anyway. Moving it a little bit, looking at it again, trying to make what I imagined fit what is actually in front of me. And I've realized that I haven't only done that with furniture. I've done it with my life. I've done it with people. I've done it with relationships. I've done it with situations. And I have done it with myself. I can create such a strong picture in my mind of what something is, what something means, where it's going, how it's supposed to end. Sometimes the picture in my head becomes stronger than what is actually happening in front of me. And for me, that's where illusion has sometimes lived. In that space between what is actually happening and the story I have created around what is happening. Sometimes I have filled in the blanks. Sometimes I've assumed intentions. Sometimes I've held on to expectations. Sometimes I have seen potential and treated that potential as though it were already reality. And when trauma is somewhere in the background, I found that those pictures can become even harder for me to separate from what is actually true. Because now I'm not only dealing with what happened, I'm dealing with what I thought it meant, what I hoped it meant, what I feared it meant, what I expected it to happen next, and the ending I had already created in my mind. And sometimes I didn't even know I was doing it. That's been one of the hardest things for me to recognize in my own healing. Sometimes what was competing with my healing wasn't only what happened to me, sometimes it was the story I had built around what happened. And I've noticed something about myself. And when there's too much happening inside me, when I'm overwhelmed, disappointed, afraid, emotionally exhausted, or when things just don't feel aligned, those thoughts can become louder. My mind starts filling in the empty spaces. And if I don't catch it, I can start responding to something that feels completely real to me, even when reality may be showing me something different. I've waited for things that weren't coming. I have tried to fix things that weren't mine to fix. I've expected things from people who had already shown me something different. I have held on to situations longer because I had already imagined how the story was supposed to end. And that's difficult because some of those pictures were beautiful. Some gave me hope. Some made difficult situations easier for me to carry. Some allowed me to believe that eventually everything would turn out exactly the way I had imagined. So letting go of an illusion can actually feel like losing something, even when what I am losing was never really there in the way I believed it was. And that's where I've had to learn to ask myself, what is actually here? Not what I wish were here, not what I thought would be here by now, not what I expected someone to become, not what I imagined the ending would look like. What is actually here? It's almost like standing in this room looking at that chair. I can keep saying, but this is where I wanted it. Okay, but it doesn't fit there. And no amount of me wanting it to fit is going to change the size of the room. So eventually, I have to move the chair. And sometimes life has required me to do the same thing. Not because the picture I had was necessarily bad, but because it wasn't the reality in front of me. And this is where God has been at the center of my story. Because I couldn't just tell myself, Nancy, stop thinking like that. For me, it didn't work that way. I had to replace those thoughts, and I had to replace them consistently, over and over and over again. The Bible talks about casting down imaginations and bringing every thought into obedience to Christ. And I have learned that for me, casting down an imagination hasn't always been a one time thing. Sometimes I cast it down today, and tomorrow it comes back. So tomorrow I cast it down again. I go back to the word again. I listen to the word again. I listen to men and women of God teaching and preaching the word. I pray again. I remind myself of what God said again and again, because I have realized that I couldn't keep trying to fight a false thought with another thought. I needed truth. And I needed to hear that truth repeatedly until the truth became louder than the illusion. When fear starts creating a story in my mind, I go back to what God says. When rejection starts creating a story, I go back to what God says. When disappointment starts telling me how everything is going to end, I go back to what God says. When my past tries to tell me what my future is going to look like, I go back to what God says again and again and again, and I still do. I'm not sharing this because I've mastered it. I haven't. I'm not sharing it because I know how somebody else should heal. I don't. I am only and expect in my own story. I'm simply sharing what I've experienced, what I've struggled with, what I've learned, what has helped me along the way, and what I'm still learning. And maybe someone listening recognizes a little bit of themselves somewhere in my story. Maybe somebody else has also fallen in love with a picture in their mind and later had to face a completely different reality. For me, I've had to learn that every thought that enters my mind doesn't automatically become truth simply because I thought it. I can bring that thought before God. I can bring it back to His Word. I can ask myself, is this actually true? Or is this fear talking? Is this hurt talking? Is this disappointment talking? Is this my past talking? And when I recognize that something isn't true, I don't just want to cast it down, I want to replace it. Because I've learned that healing isn't only about what I remove, it's also about what I place in its place. And maybe that's why all of this feels so familiar. Taking things out, putting some things back, moving some things around, realizing some things don't fit anymore, and being okay with leaving some spaces open. I'm doing that in this house right now, and God is still doing some of that work in me. The house doesn't have to look exactly like the picture I once had in my head to become a beautiful home. And maybe my life doesn't either. Maybe peace isn't everything finally turning out exactly the way I imagined. Maybe part of peace for me has been accepting what is true, letting go of what isn't, filling my mind with God's word, and trusting Him with what I still don't understand. So, we are almost there with the house. Just a few more finishing touches, a little bit here, a little bit there, slowly making it feel like home again. And in many ways, that's where I am too. Still putting some things back together, still moving some things around, still letting some things go, still learning, still healing, still casting down those imaginations, still replacing what isn't true with what God says is true, and still trusting Him with the rest. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Have a blessed and beautiful week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.